cliffs of Gallipoli rose like stone teeth from the sea, jagged and unyielding. In the early hours of April 25th, 1915, men from across the world, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, France, India, and beyond, climbed into small landing boats and rowed towards those cliffs, not knowing they were rowing into legend or into death. What followed was a campaign of breathtaking bravery and heartbreaking futility. A military operation meant to break the stalemate of trench warfare in Europe, but instead birthing a new kind of warfare and a new kind of national identity. It would be the first time the world would hear the word Anzac. It was a campaign of blood, blunder, and bitter lessons, where maps lied, intelligence failed, and political ambition outran military preparation. But in the ashes of Gallipoli, nations were forged, myths were born, and the course of World War I took a turn that few could have predicted. This is the story of the Gallipoli campaign. Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph.
Hello. Wow, I'm riveted. I don't know about the listeners, but I'll just tell you, they're riveted.
Today's episode takes us away from the Pacific and the Atlantic and into the narrow waters of the Dardanelles Strait. Today we're covering the Gallipoli campaign of World War I, an ambitious and ultimately disastrous Allied operation meant to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. It's a story of poor planning, heroic endurance, and unintended consequences that still echo through history. Whether you've heard of Gallipoli in passing, or know it as a national cornerstone for countries like Australia and New Zealand, this episode is going to take you behind the scenes of the campaign, military, political, and personal. We'll explore the bold hopes of Winston Churchill and the bitter terrain of the Gallipoli Peninsula, the sacrifices of Anzac and the Ottoman troops alike, and the legacy of a battle that failed militarily but succeeded in transforming national identities. Are you ready to get underway?
Yes, indeed.
The year is 1915. The Western Front has frozen into stalemate. Hundreds of thousands of men are dying in muddy trenches from Ypres to the Somme, and the generals are out of ideas. Enter an old dream with a new urgency. Crack open the Ottoman Empire from the south, clear a path to Russia, and knock one of Germany's key allies out of the war. The place? A rugged finger of land jutting into the sea, the Gallipoli Peninsula. This is the beginning of the Gallipoli campaign, one of the most ambitious, tragic, and mythologized operations in naval history. But before the landings, before the trenches, and the loss, there was strategy. And a very specific man behind it.
I believe that was Winston Churchill.
First Lord of the Admiralty.
Yeah.
Churchill believed naval power could force a breakthrough. If the Allies could seize control of the Dardanelles, the narrow waterway connecting the Aegean Sea and the Sea of Marmara, they could do three things at once. 1. Capture Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. 2. Knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. And 3. Resupply their faltering Russian ally through a warm water port. It was bold, it was creative, and it was risky. Do you know what the problem was?
Well, there are a couple problems. I think, one, that's the capital of the Ottoman Empire, and so it's going to be more defended. And I think we've talked in previous episodes about how there were troops pulled from the east 2 here, and I'm sure there were not mislandings. What is the word I'm looking for? Like goofed up landings, people landing in the wrong places, not a lot of cover. I think also they had the element of surprise initially, but they waited so long to get everything coordinated that the Ottomans were like, "Hey, look, there's a huge fleet over there. Let's get ready."
Well, actually, the Darnell Strait is one of the most naturally defensible waterways on Earth.
Mm.
At its narrowest, it's less than a mile wide. Its shores are steep and fortified. Ottoman gunners had a clear line of fire on any vessel trying to make the passage. Mines dotted the channel.
No.
And the current could trap any disabled ship in a killing zone.
That's quite a combo.
Now, to Churchill, these were engineering problems. To the Royal Navy admirals who had to sail these ships, they were death traps.
Yeah.
Still, the plan moved forward. In early 1915, British and French naval squadrons began shelling the outer forts guarding the straits. The Ottomans returned fire with surprising intensity. But Churchill pushed harder. He was convinced that sheer firepower, ships like the HMS Queen Elizabeth, the HMS Agamemnon, and French dreadnoughts could hammer their way through. On March 18th, the Allies launched a full-scale naval assault. It was a disaster. 3 battleships, the HMS Irresistible, the HMS Ocean, and the French Bouvet, were sunk in quick succession, most by mines. Several others were heavily damaged. Minesweepers, mostly unarmored civilian vessels with inexperienced crews, couldn't clear the straits under fire.
Yeah.
Within hours, the assault was called off. The Royal Navy, now humbled, withdrew. They realized naval power alone wouldn't do it. So, of course, the focus shifted from sea to land, from ships to soldiers. Now, Britain and its allies, which included France, Australia, and New Zealand, began preparing amphibious landing. This would be one of the first modern combined operations in military history. Ships bringing men ashore, supporting them with naval artillery, supplying them by sea, and hoping to push them up into enemy-held cliffs and ridges. And make no mistake, Gallipoli was never an easy landing. These beaches were narrow. The terrain beyond was vertical. The Ottomans, under the command of German officers and rising Ottoman stars like... we talked about him last week.
Pasha?
Mustafa Kemal.
Oh, yes.
They were dug in and determined. Churchill believed the Ottomans would collapse quickly. They didn't. In fact, many of the troops defending the peninsula were battle-hardened veterans of prior campaigns. They also knew the terrain. They had interior lines. And they were defending their homeland, not attacking anyone else's.
Right.
The Allies, on the other hand, were disembarking on a coastline they didn't know, with outdated maps, under fire, and, as you said before, often in the wrong place. So on April 25th, 1915, the landings began. At Cape Helles, British troops faced withering machine gun fire as they waded ashore. At Anzac Cove, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, the before-mentioned Anzacs, landed on the wrong beach entirely.
Yeah.
Scaling steep ridges instead of moving over gentle terrain. Within hours, hundreds were dead. The beachheads were secure, but just barely. The plan had unraveled, but the Allies dug in.
That is Imagine the guts it takes for that to happen. Like you're securing a beachhead. You're barely hanging on, and you're like, all right, we're here. Let's do it. That, I'm sure, to many of our military listeners, that's par for the course. But still, I think it's important to really emphasize how much courage it takes to do something when everything has gone wrong. I know that even the ships that they used, this is one of Churchill's brainchilds, and I thought this was an interesting tidbit about this, that they used all their old ships because they have all the new ships that they're using for fighting Germany, and Britain's got the top-of-the-line battleships and cruisers and whatnot, but these are kind of a generation past that they're using to attack the Dardanelles, and hindered them a bit because they didn't quite have the defenses that the modern ones did, and so the Ottomans were more easily able to sink them. And to Churchill, it's like, well, it's our old ships, we're going to decommission them anyway, not a big loss. But it was one more thing you can add to the pile of how this could have been improved. Like if you're going to attack a very defensible strait, you want to bring your best.
I think the men on the ships would argue the not a big loss line.
Oh, exactly. No, that's the thing. When you're talking about material, okay. But if you're a man serving on that material, different. And I think this is also part of the mindset shift that we have today versus then. I mean, it was tragic when they started seeing thousands or millions of people dead in these battles. Today, like in modern conflict, or when you would see something in Afghanistan or Iraq recently, and they're like, 8 people died, and you're like, oh, that's awful. And that is awful. It is a tragedy when human life is ended, but the scale is so much different. You know, I think they kind of got numb to just, oh yeah, we're going to lose tens of thousands of guys on this. It's just a matter of course.
So the Royal Navy entered the Dardanelles with the same confidence it had carried for centuries. Ever since Trafalgar, it had ruled the seas, but the narrow waters of the strait, guarded, mined, and lined with cannons, would not yield to prestige alone. The Dardanelles assault was meant to be quick and defensive. Instead, it became one of the most sobering naval lessons of the First World War. Let's set the scene. It's March 18th, 1915. A powerful Allied fleet made up of 16 battleships, including the before-mentioned HMS Queen Elizabeth, HMS Irresistible, and the French Beauvais, enters the straits under heavy protection. Their goal? Knock out the Ottoman forts, clear the minefields, and force passage all the way to Constantinople. The weather was good. Morale is high. London is watching. But from the moment the ships began to close in, things unraveled. The first blow comes from above. Well-placed Ottoman coastal artillery, hidden among some hills, some sighted for months. Their range is exceptional. Accuracy is even better. The second blow comes from below. Mines, laid quietly in the days before by a small Ottoman mine layer called Nusret. The Allies believed these waters had been cleared. They were wrong. The Beauvais, a French battleship, is struck mid-ships and sinks in less than 2 minutes.
Golly.
Over 600 sailors go down with her. Within an hour, HMS Irresistible and HMS Ocean are both hit. Their crews abandon ship under fire, watching helplessly as their iron giants list and vanish. Allied commanders had expected some losses, but not this. 3 capital ships lost in one day. Others crippled. Minesweepers, as said before, mostly converted trawlers manned by civilian crews, refused to press forward under fire. They weren't trained for combat, and their vessels were slow, unarmored, and easy targets.
Oh, yeah.
Admirals on board recognized the truth. They couldn't push through, not without clearing the mines, not without silencing the batteries on shore. And they couldn't do either from sea alone. So back in London, Winston Churchill still believed a renewed push could succeed. He argued that the Ottomans were close to breaking. But his naval commanders...
Admiral... It's not French. I'll say Nelson, just because.
Sackville Carden.
Oh, of course.
And his successor, Admiral... John D. Roebuck.
I was close.
Well, these guys were done gambling with lives and ships. They knew something Churchill refused to admit. Naval supremacy means nothing when you can't move freely.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't the open ocean. It was a choke point. And the Ottomans were using every inch of it to their advantage. The decision was made. The naval offensive was over. Any further effort to open the straits would need to come from the land. And just like that, the focus of the campaign pivoted from the fleet to the foot soldier. The Royal Navy would still play a role, landing troops, supporting artillery, and maintaining logistics, but it would no longer lead the charge. In many ways, Gallipoli became the funeral of an era, a farewell to the belief that Britain could solve modern wars with battleships alone. So, what went wrong?
Well, if I understand your explanation well, which I think I do, we have a strait that is very, very narrow, easily defended, with not sheer cliffs, but very steep cliffs. And then hidden among the hills around said cliffs are artillery that are zeroed into certain positions within the strait, which is very easy to do. Like you see, you have a narrow target range. You just say, all right, this cannon is going to hit this area. So if a ship is in that area, fire, and devastating effect. Additionally, and this is surprising to me, the Allies thought that the strait was clear of mines, and I guess even if it was week-old information, it was clear at that time, but shortly before this invasion, they did defend it with mines, and that made a huge difference, because if those mines weren't there, they could have sailed on through and really taken some hits, but they wouldn't have lost those 3 capital ships, for example. And then additionally, I think having the minesweepers be unarmored ships run by civilians not trained in combat, that's kind of gross unpreparedness. And I think if you're going to have any kind of minesweeper function, they need to be ready for that. I mean, it's kind of like the Britain's hold on Gibraltar. Very narrow, very defensible. They should know, oh, you know what we did over there? They're probably doing over here. Let's anticipate these things and then go forward that way. So one of the things I think with the combined arms landings and the, as you said, important humbling lessons of British history, this probably played into the Normandy invasions in the next World War. And the lessons learned here probably helped inform the Allies with that event.
Yeah, you hit most of it on the head. I'm just going to make it a little bit more concise, if you like.
Oh, yes, I'm very wordy. Please make it, for the TLDR folks out there.
So, first, intelligence. The Allies severely underestimated the strength, discipline, and firepower of the Ottoman defenders.
Oh, that's
They
right.
dismissed reports of fortified gun emplacements and newly laden minefields. Their maps were outdated, and their aerial reconnaissance in its infancy, was spotty. Second, logistics. The minesweeping operation was under-resourced, under-led, and exposed. Sailors sent into danger had neither protection nor proper training. The result was chaos under fire and mines left unremoved. Third, command confusion. The chain of command between naval and land forces was divided, with no unified leadership. Naval admirals and army generals didn't share the same priorities, and planning was rushed and disjointed. And then fourth, overconfidence. Perhaps the most damaging flaw of all. British leadership believed that the Ottomans, whom they'd long considered a sick man of Europe, would collapse under pressure. They assumed that fear of the Royal Navy alone would be enough to scatter defenders. But the men on those cliffs had no intention of giving up. They weren't just defending empire. They were defending homeland.
Right.
And in many cases, they were led by one of the most formidable commanders of the 20th century. We mentioned him before, do you remember?
Oh, you did. Gosh. I'm sure the folks are yelling into their earbuds right now. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Mustafa Kemal.
Kemal, right. Okay. I was going to say Kumar, but I knew that was wrong.
He is also the future Ataturk.
What is
you know
that?
What that is?
No. I can't tell if that's a title I would want or not.
He is the founder and first president of the Republic of Turkey.
Oh, okay. That's pretty good. Yeah, I guess when running a campaign, you can say, hey, remember when I brilliantly defended our homeland? Vote for me. Yes, we will vote for you.
So, naval historian J.L. Grantstein once wrote, quote, "It wasn't that the Royal Navy forgot how to fight. It was that the war itself had changed." Now, that was never clearer than at Gallipoli. Mines had become equal to battleships. Hidden artillery could neutralize a dreadnought. And a single, determined soldier with a field gun on a hill could stall the might of an empire. But the fleet didn't retreat entirely. After the failed assault, the Royal Navy shifted to a support role, bombarding positions, maintaining communication lines, and most importantly, ferrying troops. In April, it would deliver men into deadly beaches. In the fall and winter, it would evacuate them. The Gallipoli campaign was far from over. In fact, the worst was yet to come.
Oh, no. You know, that's one of those situations where you're dropping off guys, you're having ships lost, and things look bleak because, of course, like you said, they're coming in with this attitude of superiority. Like, hey, we're the British Navy. We take care of business. This is another day of work, no problem. And then things go wrong. And then you're like, oh, that's awful, but we can pivot. We can make this work. And then it gets worse from there. I know that our compatriots in Australia and New Zealand have Anzac Day, and they celebrate it. Because of this, they mourn because the loss was so great. You know it's got to be pretty bad when they establish a holiday of remembrance for that. This is definitely one of those battles that is studied in military colleges. It's like, what went right? What went wrong? What can you do with, again, like we've discussed previous, Britain had a lot more technology and discipline and experience, whereas the Ottomans were under-equipped in many cases. But when it came to this particular battle, they executed flawlessly. They were right on the money.
Yep. So that's going to take us to the dawn of April 25th, 1915. So Allied transports hovered offshore, their hulls loaded with soldiers who were tired and anxious and about to become part of something bigger than themselves. Across the water loomed the Gallipoli Peninsula, a rugged stretch of land jutting into the sea like a clenched fist. Above the rocky shoreline, Ottoman trenches overlooked every beach. Guns were zeroed in, barbed wire was laid, and the defenders were waiting. The Allies were coming, but Gallipoli would not be taken easily. Let's talk about the plan, such as it was. The British and French High Command envisioned multiple simultaneous landings. British forces at Cape Helles in the south would push northward. French troops would launch a divisionary assault at Kum Kala on the Asian side. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, Anzacs, would land further north at a beach near Gaba Tepa, aiming to seize the high ridges and cut off Ottoman reinforcements. In theory, it was a three-pronged rapid shock. In practice, it was a disaster unfolding in real time. At Cape Helles, 5 beaches designated Sierra, Victor, William, X-Ray, and Yankee were to be taken by British regulars. The landings at William Beach turned into a bloodbath. The Ottomans, under the command of Colonel
Mustafa Kemal.
Halel Sami Bey.
Oh, you can't change names on me like that. I know when you said Colonel, I was wrong.
He had positioned machine guns to sweep the surf. As the British came ashore in rowing boats, fully exposed, they were mowed down in the water. At Victor Beach, the Allies attempted something bold, ramming a converted collier ship, the SS River Clyde, directly onto the shore to deploy troops through ramps and gangways. The result was chaos. The Clyde ran aground too far out. Soldiers jumped into neck-deep water under machine gun fire. Many of them drowned before even reaching dry land. Meanwhile, to the north, the Anzacs faced their own nightmare. Navigational errors landed them not on the flatter beach near Gaba Tepe, but on a steep, narrow cove flanked by cliffs. It would come to be known as Anzac Cove, and it was a death trap.
Golly.
Climbing ridges under fire, the Anzacs were met by fierce Ottoman resistance. But perhaps more importantly, they were met by commanders whose name would become legend.
I'm guessing... Gosh, No, I just need to throw a name out there. Buckminster Fuller.
Mustafa Kemal.
Oh, no! Okay. So, for the record, you've asked me the name of this guy 3 times. And 3 times I got it wrong. 1 time you asked me the name of a different guy, and I used his name.
Yep.
All right, for those, I don't know if all y'all are committing to having some kind of drinking game where I either get the name right or wrong, but I hope you're well. I'm so sorry.
So, Kemal was a lieutenant colonel commanding the Ottoman 19th Division. Upon hearing the landings had begun, he took the initiative. Without waiting for orders, he moved his troops directly into the Anzacs' path. At Chinook Bihar and Baby 700, Turkish troops arrived just ahead of the advancing Australians and New Zealanders. Bayonets were fixed. Charges were ordered. Close quarters fighting raged along the ridges. Kemal's bold action and the discipline of his men stopped the Anzac advance cold. Throughout the day, across every landing site, the story was the same. Men packed into boats with no cover. Steep terrain that shattered all assumptions. Ottoman defenders who knew every inch of ground and fought with tenacity. And poor Allied coordination where naval gunfire either arrived late or not at all.
Oh.
Wounded soldiers lay exposed on sun-scorched beaches with little medical care, under persistent sniper fire. Water was scarce. Communications broke down. And yet, against all odds, the Allies held their beachheads. By nightfall on April 25th, thousands were dead, thousands more wounded. But no major objectives had been taken. The heights were still in Ottoman hands. The push inland had stalled. The campaign's best chance for a breakout was gone. And so began the next phase of Gallipoli.
Oh my gosh.
Not swift conquest, but entrenchment.
Mm-hmm.
Months of stagnant trench warfare, much like the Western Front, but with even worse terrain, sanitation, and resupply. But let's not lose sight of what was achieved, even though it was at a staggering cost.
Yeah.
The Anzacs, despite all odds, carved out a foothold at Anzac Cove. Their courage in the face of overwhelming difficulty forged a legacy that would define the national consciousness of Australia and New Zealand for generations. In those first brutal hours, soldiers like John Simpson Kirkpatrick, who used a donkey to evacuate the wounded under fire, became folk heroes. So too did unnamed stretcher bearers, beach medics, and naval signalmen who kept coordination alive under shrapnel and sniper fire. The Royal Navy played a crucial role throughout the landings, ferrying troops in open boats, firing from offshore to suppress Ottoman positions, rescuing the wounded, and bringing in supplies. But, of course, naval gunnery had its limits. Ridges shielded Ottoman guns from line-of-sight bombardment. Targets shifted too quickly for dreadnoughts to track. Naval shells often overshot or landed too late to matter. So, Gallipoli was showing the world something vital. Amphibious warfare had evolved, but doctrine hadn't caught up. In military academies today, the Gallipoli landings are studied not just for bravery or sacrifice, but for everything that went wrong.
Absolutely.
Poor planning, inadequate intelligence, over-ambitious objectives, lack of inter-service coordination, and above all, understanding the enemy. But in cemeteries from Lone Pine to Hellas, the men who paid for those mistakes lie in rows, honored, remembered, and often misunderstood by the generations that followed. And for the Ottomans, April 25th was not just defense, it was resurrection.
Yes.
The so-called sick man of Europe had just held the line against the greatest naval powers on earth. They had bloodied the British lion and the French rooster, and they had begun to birth a national hero in...
Hold on. Mustafa Kemal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who would one day refound the...
Turkish Republic of Turkey.
Yes. Now,
Two in a row.
Yeah. Yep, you got it. Gallipoli wasn't just a battle, it was an origin story for three nations.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, Australia, New Zealand definitely kind of got there. They were already tough SOBs, forgive my strong letters. This kind of solidified that reputation, I think. Whenever I would hear folks that were interviewed, American soldiers that were interviewed about who the toughest warriors were in that conflict in World War I, consistently Australians, New Zealanders. They just went for it, and they certainly did in this case. And then Turkey, or I guess the Ottoman Empire initially, they were not doing great from a logistical standpoint. They've been losing their empire for centuries. It's been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Well, their fate was sealed eventually, but they could see the end was near if they didn't succeed. And in this moment, they showed who they were and what they could do. And I'm sure to this day, it's a moment of pride to those that live in Turkey. And for the British and the French that helped, and then the extended British Empire, Indians, Australians, New Zealanders, knowing that if you can learn from these mistakes, that makes you better. And I think that's a lesson for all of us generally on every scale. Whenever you make a mistake in a relationship or job, or it's how you respond. And this was devastating to those countries. I mean, I think this event caused Winston Churchill to kind of be demoted. Like, it was his idea, so it was his neck on the line, and he was like, hey, we don't need you anymore, because that was an unmitigated disaster. But then he became prime minister of the UK at a crucial time because he learned the lessons from this event. And so a lot of things came out of this, and that's not to say that it was a good thing, but it's how you respond. And I think that's really the lesson with this and many other conflicts.
So after the guns of April 25th fell silent, there was no great victory parade, no sweeping push to Constantinople, just a grim realization on both sides no one was going anywhere. The Gallipoli campaign, envisioned as a fast and decisive strike, now dissolved into a static siege. The beaches that had been taken at such cost became launch pads for an even bloodier phase: entrenchment. And so across the rugged ridges and gullies of the peninsula, a brutal new war began. A war of inches, of attrition, and of survival. Imagine it. The terrain at Gallipoli was nothing like the flat mud fields of the Western Front. Here, the earth was dry and rocky, the ridges sharp and jagged. Trench lines were sometimes just a few dozen yards apart, divided by steep, scrub-choked ravines. Soldiers dug into the cliffs, building trenches wherever the soil allowed. Many slept on bare rock. There was no drainage, no overhead cover, and the summer heat was merciless.
Oh, gosh, yes.
By June, the peninsula had become a living hell. Disease spread quickly. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid. The stench of unburied bodies filled the gullies. Lice crawled through every uniform seam. Flies covered open wounds and swarmed the trenches. Latrines overflowed. Fresh water had to be shipped in by boat, and even then it was often contaminated.
Ugh.
To be wounded was almost a death sentence. Evacuation required a stretcher to the beach, a long wait in the sun, and a rough ride in a landing craft back to a hospital ship, if one was even available. All the while, shells rained down. The Ottomans held the high ground, especially at Chunukbar and Achi Baba. From these positions, they could observe Allied trenches and call in devastating artillery fire. Snipers picked off men reaching for rations or filling water bottles. Even a trip to the latrine could be fatal. The Royal Navy, anchored offshore, tried to suppress Ottoman guns with ship-based bombardment, but the terrain was too rugged. The emplacements too well hidden. Naval fire was inaccurate and ineffective, and sometimes even fell on Allied lines by mistake.
Oh my gosh.
And yet, amid all this, the fighting continued. Throughout May and June, both sides launched repeated offenses. The Allies attacked at Krithia multiple times, hoping to break through at Cape Helles. Each time they gained a few hundred yards and lost thousands of men. The Ottomans counterattacked with equal desperation, trying to push the invaders back into the sea. Their assaults, too, were repelled with heavy losses. By midsummer, the front lines had barely moved, but the body count had soared. What's most remarkable, perhaps, is the endurance of the men in the trenches. Australians, New Zealanders, Indians, Gurkhas, Senegalese, Irish, Welsh, French, and Ottomans all fought and died in conditions few modern soldiers could imagine. Stories of individual courage emerged. At Lone Pine, Anzacs fought hand-to-hand in tunnels and sandbagged trenches, their bayonets jammed from overuse, resorting to fists and knives.
Wow.
At the Neck, waves of Australian cavalry charged Ottoman machine guns in one of the most hauntingly futile attacks of the war. At Suvla Bay, new British reinforcements landed in August. Exhausted, dehydrated, and poorly led, their attack bogged down within days. The August offensive, a final attempt to break the stalemate, failed. The Allies tried to seize the ridges at Chunuk and Hill 971. For a brief moment, New Zealand troops reached the summit. But they were unsupported, surrounded, and ultimately pushed off by counterattacks, led by none other than
Kumal.
The dream of a Gallipoli breakthrough died on those ridges. As the campaign wore on into the fall, morale plummeted. Supplies ran low, casualties mounted. The political tide back home began to turn. In London, questions were being asked. In Australia and New Zealand, letters from the front painted a grim picture. And in Istanbul, the Ottomans, though battered, felt victory within reach. Through it all, the Royal Navy kept the lifeline alive. It ferried rations and water daily. It brought in reinforcements. It evacuated the wounded. And it held the seaward flank like a steel wall. And yet, for all its effort, the Navy could not deliver victory. The campaign had become a land war, one it could not win from the sea. One can't help but reflect on the futility of it all. Thousands died for a few hills with unfamiliar names. Nothing strategic had been captured. No breakthrough achieved. Constantinople was no closer. Russia remained cut off, and the cost in lives and resources had become unbearable. In the months ahead, a decision would finally be made. It was time to withdraw, but that, too, would require incredible planning, courage, and coordination.
As I hear you tell this story, the machine gun, I think, is such a revolutionary weapon of war. And I think we saw it in other fronts as well. But as a defensive tool, it is incredible. And when you hear about like the Australian cavalry charge, or when they're mounted on the tops of sides or cliff sides, it's just super difficult to get past. And that's why you start seeing trenches on multiple fronts. And so I'm no warrior. Just want people to know or reinforce this fact. I have had to dig in my backyard, and my backyard is extremely rocky, and it is difficult, hot, and I have unlimited access to water effectively. I can take breaks. I'm not under fire. It's as comfortable as it could be considering the difficulty of the work, and they had none of that. They had, like you said, dead bodies everywhere, latrines overflowing, any open wound swarmed by flies, and a potential risk of death. And when you talk about the evacuation, when you said, yeah, it took planning. Oh, well, yeah, of course. There's a bunch of dudes on a barely fortified beach, and how do we withdraw them in a way that they don't get overrun or destroyed? Gosh, you have to wonder what the times were in these men's lives that gave them the will to be able to do even this much. You know what I mean? Like, what was their daily life like before this, as far as industrialization is new, and it's unimaginable.
So, by November 1915, the illusion had shattered. The Allied landings had failed, the summer offensives had failed, and the autumn rains, now turning into winter storms, added a final insult to months of injury. The decision came quickly. No headlines, no stirring speeches, just a sober assessment. Gallipoli had become unwinnable. So now, after 8 months of blood and blunder, the Allies prepared to do something they'd never done on this scale before: evacuate under fire. The word evacuation might sound simple, but in military history, it's among the most dangerous operations you could attempt. Think about it. Tens of thousands of soldiers spread across exposed beaches. Supplies, ammunition, and artillery that can't all be brought back. An enemy who only needs to sense retreat to launch a final devastating blow.
Mm-hmm.
To withdraw successfully required secrecy, timing, and flawless coordination. But somehow, astonishingly, the evacuation of Gallipoli became the most successful phase of the entire campaign. Planning began in earnest in December of 1915. The decision makers were cautious. A botched withdrawal could result in catastrophe. Tens of thousands of men trapped or slaughtered during retreat. Commanders decided to evacuate in phases. First, troops at Anzac Cove and Suvla Bay, whose positions were most precarious. Later, the larger force at Cape Helles. Men would be pulled out gradually under the cover of darkness while maintaining the illusion of a fully manned line. That illusion became one of the most ingenious parts of the campaign. Soldiers rigged rifles to fire automatically, using tin cans and melting ice to delay triggers. Campfires were kept burning. Dummy figures were placed in trenches. Radios continued to send messages. The Ottomans saw no change. On the final night at Anzac and Suvla, December 19th, over 35,000 men were withdrawn without a single combat casualty. Not one. Let that sink in. This was the same theater that had swallowed tens of thousands during the landings and the offenses. And now, thanks to meticulous naval coordination, silent discipline, and the cover of darkness, troops slipped away like ghosts. The Royal Navy played the central role. Every night, boats crept ashore, loaded up with men and gear, and disappeared into the Aegean mist. Hospital ships stood by for emergencies. Destroyers patrolled for Ottoman attack craft. Rearguard positions were maintained until the last possible moment. Weeks later, in January of 1916, the final phase began, the evacuation of Cape Helles. This was riskier. The Ottomans had grown suspicious. The weather was deteriorating, and the terrain made a quiet withdrawal harder to conceal. Yet, once again, the operation succeeded. On January 9th, 1916, the last Allied troops departed Gallipoli. And with that, the campaign, one of the bloodiest and most fruitless of the Great War, was over. The aftermath was staggering. In total, Allied casualties numbered over 250,000.
Golly.
The Ottomans suffered roughly the same. The British Empire had learned the hard way that naval power alone could not bend modern warfare to its will. Amphibious operations, so often romanticized, required terrain knowledge, coordination, and absolute clarity of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And politically, the fallout was swift. Winston Churchill, architect of the Dardanelles Plan, was forced to resign from the Admiralty. His reputation shattered. He temporarily left politics and returned to active military service on the Western Front. Back in Australia and New Zealand, the public mourned, but also mythologized. Gallipoli became a founding story. Anzac Day was born. A moment of tragedy turned into a pillar of national identity. For Turkey, Gallipoli was more than a victory. It was vindication. The Ottoman Empire, long dismissed as a fading relic, had held its own against the greatest naval powers on earth. And from the ashes of that defense rose a name that would define a republic.
Mustafa Kemal!
There you go.
Yes.
Even today, the cliffs of Gallipoli whisper their legacy. You can walk the beaches of Anzac Cove, where men once clung to life under fire. You can climb the heights of Chinook Briar, where New Zealanders made their stand. You can visit the cemeteries, British, Turkish, French, Indian, and see the names carved into stone beside the sea. And above them all, a quote from Mufasta himself, speaking of the families of Allied soldiers. Quote, "Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace." Gallipoli was many things: a military failure, a political scandal, a human tragedy. But it was also a crucible where modern warfare was tested, where old empires bled, and where new nations began to understand who they were.
That is a very sobering... I mean, the way you were describing it, and I know that's how things went down, it's just tragic. I mean, this is kind of another page or chapter in the book of how awful World War I actually was. The human cost, the psychological effect that it had on nations for generations. I mean, you still see Anzac Day is still celebrated. This is still remembered. There are other portions around Europe that have remembrances based on how it affected them. And I guess, personally, in my circles, I don't see a lot of remembering of events, even from 10 years ago. And I think it's important to understand the sacrifice and dedication of those that came before us and what they were willing to do and the cause they were willing to fight for. It helps inspire and push us as individuals and as nations to do better and to understand who are we, what do we believe in, and what are we willing to fight for. Those are all questions we need to answer. And this, although tragic, can help, I think, answer some of those questions for some folks.
Yeah. When the last Allies sailed away from the shores of Gallipoli in January of 1916, they left more than bodies behind. They left a legacy, one steeped in pain, pride, politics, and memory. Gallipoli didn't change the course of the First World War, but it profoundly shaped how nations remembered war, how militaries prepared for it, and how the modern world wrestles with its own myths. Let's begin with Australia and New Zealand. Before Gallipoli, these two young nations were still defining themselves. Dominion outposts of the British Empire, distant and obedient. But on April 25th, 1915, the Anzacs stepped into history. Their performance in battle, especially under impossible conditions, ignited something powerful back home. Stories of mateship, endurance, and sacrifice, whether in the trenches of Lone Pine or the gullies of Anzac Cove, became central to national identity. And from that came a day of remembrance, Anzac Day, observed every April 25th. To this day is not just a memorial. It's a national rite of passage. Dawn services, silent marches, speeches, not to glorify war, but to honor those who went, many never to return. The Gallipoli dead gave birth to a living ideal, courage without conquest, character in the face of calamity. It's a legacy etched in place like Lone Pine Cemetery, where the gravestones of teenagers and farmers lie beneath wind-swept trees overlooking the Aegean. And then there is Turkey, or more precisely, what would become Turkey. For the Ottoman Empire, Gallipoli was a rare bright spot in a war of disintegration. But for the Turkish people, it was foundational. The defense of the peninsula under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal created a national hero. His actions at Çanakkale and other ridgelines inspired confidence and pride. After the war, Kemal would lead the Turkish War of Independence and found the modern Turkish Republic in 1923. In the Turkish imagination, Gallipoli is not remembered as an Ottoman victory, but as the beginning of Turkey itself. Moments at Çanakkale now stand as symbols of unity, resistance, and rebirth. And in a remarkable gesture of reconciliation, Kemal, decades later, addressed the mothers of fallen soldiers with these words, quote, "The heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives. You are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore rest in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well." That inscription still stands at Anzac Cove. It is a testament to shared grief and the rare capacity of war's survivors to create peace from ashes. But Gallipoli also left deep scars. In Britain, the campaign became synonymous with mismanagement. The public, already disillusioned by trench stalemates in France, saw Gallipoli as an elite blunder, a sacrifice of colonial lives for imperial pride. Churchill, its chief architect, was forced from office, humiliated, though he would return famously to lead Britain in World War II. Gallipoli haunted him. He called it, quote, "an enterprise into which the best of the empire marched, and from which they did not return." In France, the campaign received far less public attention. Their troops, many from colonial North and West Africa, fought bravely, especially at Comcale. but their sacrifice was largely overshadowed by events on the Western Front. The Indian Army and the Gurkha regiments are often overlooked in popular memory, yet they endured some of the harshest conditions on the peninsula, and their valor is still honored in regimental histories and memorials across South Asia. Militarily, the Gallipoli campaign became a cautious tale. It revealed the dangers of inadequate intelligence, poor inter-service coordination, underestimating the defender, and the brutal unpredictability of amphibious operations. These lessons were not lost on the world's militaries. Decades later, when the Allies planned the Normandy landings in World War II, they studied Gallipoli closely. Planners like Admiral Bertram Ramsay and General Dwight D. Eisenhower knew what could go wrong on a hostile beach. In that sense, Gallipoli didn't just shape memory, it shaped doctrine. And what about the U.S. Navy? Though America was not involved in Gallipoli, U.S. naval observers took careful note. The campaign underscored the critical importance of integrated amphibious warfare, coordination between ships, troops, logistics, and air support. These lessons would later guide U.S. operations in the Pacific World War II, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, where amphibious assaults became central to American strategy. The ghost of Gallipoli hovered over every LCVP ramp, every pre-landing bombardment, every beachhead. But perhaps Gallipoli's most enduring legacy isn't found in textbooks or war colleges. It's in the stories passed down of young men rowing ashore under fire, of trench humor amid despair, of enemies who later embraced in remembrance. It's in the way nations remember not just their victories, but their failures. Gallipoli was a failure, but it was also a crucible that forged character, humility, and national identity. It reminds us that heroism and futility often walk side by side, and that war, in all its tragedy, sometimes leaves behind more than ruins. As we close this episode, we remember the names not listed in textbooks. The rifleman from Sydney, the Gurkha scout from Nepal, the French marine from Marseille, the Turkish peasant turned soldier from Anatolia. They never met, but they all shared the same sun, the same fear, and in many cases, the same fate. May their stories never be forgotten.
I think it's times like this that it's helpful for me to talk about this kind of stuff. This isn't something I go out on a date with my wife and say, hey, you want to talk about the Gallipoli campaign? Doesn't really happen. But the extended consequences of something like that are significant. Yeah, this was a victory for the Ottomans, but I know they pulled a lot of veterans from the eastern side of their territory when they were fighting in the Caucasus campaign to help defend their homeland, and that did have consequences. But, I mean, it's kind of hard to see what these sacrifices or what these decisions do to influence us today. And I think it was helpful for Dale to say, yeah, this led to a more successful Normandy invasion or coordination in the Pacific for the American Navy. There's a lot of lessons militarily that we can learn from that, even for just you and me. If you were non-military or retired military, what can you do? What can you do with this information? Why is history important at all? And I think it's notable to know that when struggle comes, and it will, and you have to do things that are unpleasant, which you will, what you choose and what consequences and learnings can come from that, and what growth either yourself or your family can experience because of what you choose. And I think the fate of nations is determined in stuff like this, but also of individuals. And it's nice to remember that.
All right, so before we say goodbye, we're going to honor one of our fallen angels. Today, we're going to honor First Sergeant Pascal C. Pula Sr. His hometown was Apache, Oklahoma. Served in the U.S. Army, Company C, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. He received 4 Silver Stars, 5 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and a Distinguished Service Cross. His date of sacrifice was November 7th, 1967, killed in action near Loc Nai, Vietnam. He was 45. A full-blooded Kiowa from Oklahoma, Sergeant Pascal Cletus Pula Sr. is the most decorated Native American soldier in U.S. history, having earned 42 medals, badges, citations, and campaign ribbons for his combat service and for valor. His list of honors includes 4 Silver Stars, 5 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Distinguished Service Cross. Sergeant Pula served his country in combat during World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. He was wounded in all 3 conflicts. After serving with distinction in World War II and Korea, Pula officially retired from the Army in 1962. 5 years later, he re-entered the military in hopes of keeping his son Lindley from having to go to Vietnam. Army regulations prohibited 2 members of the same family from serving in a combat zone without their consent. One of Sergeant Pula's other sons, Pascal Pula Jr., had already lost a leg in an explosion while serving in Vietnam. Each of Sergeant Pula's 4 sons entered the Army, 3 of them going to Vietnam. Just 4 months after arriving in Vietnam, Sergeant Pascal C. Pula Sr. was killed in action trying to carry a wounded soldier to safety. His long legacy of bravery and devotion to his country is captured, in part, by his 4 Silver Star citations. First Silver Star citation, World War II. The President of the United States of America, authorized by the Act of Congress, July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Staff Sergeant Pascal Cletus Pula, Army Serial Number 181-31087, United States Army, for gallantry in action against the enemy while serving with Company M, 8th Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division, near Recunge, Belgium, on 8 September 1944, while attacking in support of a rifle company. Sergeant Pula displaced his machine gun squad forward across an open field under heavy mortar and small arms fire in such a manner as to effect a minimum number of casualties among his squad. After reaching his new position, Sergeant Pula saw the enemy advance in a strong counterattack. Standing unflinchingly in the face of withering machine gun fire for 5 minutes, he hurled hand grenades until the enemy force sustained numerous casualties and was dispersed. Due to Sergeant Pula's action, many of his comrades' lives were saved, and the company was able to continue the attack and capture strongly defended enemy positions. Sergeant Pula's display of courage, aggressive spirit, and complete disregard for personal safety are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service. Second Silver Star citation, Korean War. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting a bronze oak leaf cluster in lieu of a second award of the Silver Star to Sergeant First Class Pascal Cletus Pula, Army Serial Number 181-31087, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving with Company C, 27th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division, on 19 September 1950, when the company attack on an enemy position was halted by stiff enemy resistance. Sergeant First Class Pula volunteered to lead his squad in an assault, courageously leading his men in a charge up the slope to penetrate the enemy perimeter and engage the numerically superior enemy in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Sergeant First Class Pula inspired his men to hold their position until the remainder of the company was able to seize the objective. Sergeant First Class Pula's outstanding leadership reflects great credit upon himself and is in keeping with the highest tradition of the American soldier. Third Silver Star citation, Korean War. The President of the United States of America, authorized by the Act of Congress July 9th, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting a second bronze oak leaf cluster in lieu of a third award of the Silver Star to Master Sergeant Pascal Cletus Pula, Army Serial Number 181311087, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving with Company C, 27th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division, on 4 April 1951, near Chongong-ni, Korea. While attacking some hostile positions, one squad of Master Sergeant Pula's platoon was immobilized by devastating automatic weapons and mortar barrage. Exposing himself to the deadly fire, he advanced slowly across open terrain, firing his rifle as he progressed. By deliberately diverting the attention of the foe to himself, he enabled his men to maneuver to more advantageous positions. Master Sergeant Pula's valorous actions were instrumental in the fulfillment of the unit mission and are in keeping with the highest traditions of the American soldier. Fourth Silver Star Citation, Vietnam War. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress July 8, 1918, amended by Act of July 25, 1963, takes pride in presenting a third bronze oak leaf cluster in lieu of a fourth award of the Silver Star, posthumously, to First Sergeant Pascal Cletus Pula, Army Serial Number 181311087, United States Army, for gallantry in action against a hostile force in the Republic of Vietnam on 7 November 1967, while serving with Company C, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. On this date, during Operation Shenandoah II, First Sergeant Pula was accompanying his unit on a two-company search and destroy mission near Loch Ness. As the patrol was moving through a rubber plantation, they were subject to sniper fire. Within minutes, the area was racked with intensive claymore mine, rocket, small arms, and automatic weapons fire from a numerically superior Viet Cong force. First Sergeant Pula unhesitatingly ran to the lead squad, which was receiving the brunt of the enemy fire. With complete disregard for his personal safety, he exposed himself to assist in deploying the men and establishing an effective base of fire. Although wounded, he continued to move about the area, encouraging his men and pulling casualties to cover. He was assisting a wounded man to safety when he was mortally wounded by Viet Cong fire. His dynamic leadership and exemplary courage contributed significantly to the successful deployment of the squad and undoubtedly saved the lives of many of his fellow soldiers. First Sergeant Pula's unquestionable valor in close combat against numerically superior hostile forces is in keeping with the finest traditions of military service and reflects great credit upon himself, the 1st Infantry Division, and the United States Army. Pula Hall at the U.S. Army base in Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, where Sergeant Pula was stationed before his deployment to Vietnam, is named in his honor. He is also honored on Panel 29E, Line 43 of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Sergeant Pula's wife, Irene, spoke at his funeral. He has followed the trail of the great chiefs, she said. His people hold him in honor and highest esteem. He has given his life for the people and the country he loved so much. First Sergeant Pascal C. Pula Sr., we thank you.
Thank you. Well, that seemed like a heavier episode to me, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. If you ever want to give us feedback, maybe you have a relative that fought in this campaign and they have a story that you want to share with us or with everybody else, there's a couple of ways you can contact us and we can share that story. So number one, email. You can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on x.com, formerly twitter.com, or x-Twitter. The handle is at USNHistoryPod. Additionally, if you look in the show notes, there is a link to a Discord server. And in that Discord server, you can find us. Actually, and then other listeners also. So it's really interactive. You can talk to other people. You can bring this episode up. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Do you have a connection to it somehow? Or do you think, I'm a fool for not remembering Mustafa Kemal's name so many times. I did make up for it, though. Lastly, if you want to rate and review us, that helps us. So, on your favorite podcast app, give us a rating. Let us know what you like or what you'd like to see, and then we'll see what we can do about that. Also, tell a friend, family member, coworker, etc. And we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.
With that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Bye.
See ya.